Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Lake Protectors podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Canay. I'm the Education for Action Manager here with the Lake George Association. Every few weeks, we're going to be bringing you guys some episodes regarding topics about the lake, work we're doing on the lake here at the Lake George Association. And I am so happy that we have our first guest with us, Chair of our board, Dr. John Kelly. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Well, we appreciate you coming on for our first episode, and let's dive right in. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us your background.
Great. Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for doing this. I think it's so important that we reach out to our community and share what we're doing. You can't communicate enough, I've found over the years.
Definitely.
So I'm a sort of an odd duck. I'm a techie.
Okay.
And a business person.
Yep.
And I went through my education in science and engineering, BS, MS in physics, and then I went over to engineering because I wanted to apply science to getting things done. So I finished my PhD in 1980. I know it seems like a long time ago to you. I think you were born, but maybe not.
I have a really skewed timeline. Like 10 years ago to me is still the 90s.
Okay.
Like it just, COVID threw everything off too.
It sure did.
Really
it sure did.
Gauge,
yeah. So I mean, just chronologically, then I joined IBM right out of my PhD at RPI, and went to work for IBM. Thought I'd be there for a few years, and retired a couple of years ago after 40 years at IBM with all sorts of fascinating jobs and science and engineering and building all sorts of computers and advanced research and whatnot. But throughout it all was my connection to Lake George.
Yeah.
And my grandfather built his place, family's place, up here in the late 40s.
Okay.
Up in Assembly Point. And so growing up as a kid, I was always up here. We lived in the Capital District and fell in love with the lake. And I always felt that my family had to have the same experience. So we've been on the lake now for forever.
Yeah.
And really love it. And that really led to me joining the Fund for Lake George, which of course merged with the LGA.
Yeah.
And I've been on the board now for about 12 years.
Okay.
And just thrilled to be the chair of the board and trying to help out even more.
That's wonderful. What's your favorite part of the lake? I know that's a hard question. We ask everyone.
I know. Well, my favorite part of the lake is not geographic. I was just up in the north end yesterday, and of course on Assembly Point in the South Basin. It's the water. I mean, the water is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I have traveled all over this world on every continent, just about, and seen lakes and rivers and oceans and everything you can imagine. Yeah. And there's just nothing like the water of Lake George. It's we joke in our family, it's like holy water. Yeah. It's just so special, so special. And so I love swimming in it, boating on it, sailing on it, and everything to do with the water.
Now, do you drink the water at your house
We
too?
do.
Okay.
Yeah, we have our place, lines into the lake.
Yep.
Bring it in and just filter out any sediment, and that's it. Drink it. It's beautiful water.
Yes, beautiful water to be kept clean. Preserved.
Exactly. Forever.
So you've been on the board for 12 years between the fund, now the LGA, but you just assumed your role as the chair of the board fairly recently. What are your hopes for what the LGA will accomplish throughout your tenure on the board?
Sure. Well, first of all, I have to give my recent two predecessors a lot of credit. Jeff Colleen was chair of the board of the Fund for Lake George. And he brought me in to the team and was just a fantastic leader. And he worked with Pete Menzie, who was at that time chair of the board of the LGA. And it was two of them that put us together, which I completely supported because it just made the organizations much, much stronger being together. And really, the two organizations complemented each other in the skills and the people that they were working with. So it's a fantastic combination. And then Pete, unfortunately, Jeff passed on us way too early. But Pete took over, and Pete was just incredible in all the work he did, including being an interim ED for us. And he took us to new heights. And so when Pete was terming out, as chair, I thought about it, and I had a lot of other things that I'm doing, but I decided that this was one of the most important things I was doing. So I pushed a lot of stuff aside so I could help chair the board. My goals are really pretty simple
Yeah.
for the LGA. First and foremost, it's all about the lake.
Yeah.
It's all about the lake, and I remind people that's all that matters here is the lake itself, the water.
The water.
The water. But in order to do that, I really have three priorities.
Okay.
One is our mantra is science to solutions. And I think that is a very powerful equation.
Yeah.
And I don't know of anybody else that does it as well as we do, not even close.
Right.
And so I want to double down, triple down on science to solutions, bigger, better science, bigger, better solutions, more impact on the lake. The second is really trying to educate and bring the stakeholders together. Because again, if it's all about the lake, then it doesn't matter what your perspective is. You know, do you live on the lake? Do you work on the lake? Are you, an association? Are you a government agency?
Or just living in the watershed.
Oh, just live in a watershed. That's right.
Yeah.
So bringing all the stakeholders together, to me is really important because it's going to take a village, as they say, to protect this lake.
Lots of
many
threats.
villages.
Yeah.
So bringing parties together that have different perspectives to just protect the lake. And then my third priority is to keep increasing our resources because, we are a big organization. We have over 40 programs.
Yeah.
They're not cheap. They're not cheap.
No.
And fantastic staff.
Yeah.
And I think I want to grow our resources, which of course includes our funds, our endowment, so that we can do more and more to protect this lake. So
more programs
in
the watershed.
That's right.
Now, for some of our listeners that don't know what science to solutions means, can you expand on that a little? Just kind of give us like a rundown. What does that actually mean? And maybe some of the programs that we do to help implement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, it's very unique.
Yeah.
It's really very unique. Lots of lake associations have a little bit of science or they'll have some solutions they're working on.
Yeah.
But they're not very well directed.
Yeah.
And so our view is that lake is a very complex ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's not just the water, it's everything that lives in it, around it. And so by studying the science of the lake, it informs us what to do and many times what not to do.
Right.
So a couple of examples. The Legacy Jefferson Project, before the Jefferson Project, Darren Freshwater Institute and RPI had studied the lake for 30 years.
Yep.
And came out with a set of findings which were sort of stunning in terms of some of the degradation of the water. One of them was salt levels in the lake, and salt levels had tripled. So the science identified the problem. We found the sources. Of course, it was road salt. It was coming from certain places. And then we developed a set of solutions around reducing road salt. We used computer models to model if we reduce it by half, how long will it take to get back to near normal? And we implemented all that. We convinced the communities, the towns, even the guys with the plows to reduce the salt safely. And guess what? Everybody said, we're going to cut the salt in half. And we're now seeing decreasing levels of salt in the lake. So science identified it, identified some solutions. People took up the mantra and did it. Another great example is invasive species. We had a half a dozen of them or so in the lake, everything from plants to, bugs and things. And through a great program that identified them, they're all coming in on boats. And so we, along with the Park Commission, implemented a boat washing program, jointly funded it. And guess what? And knock on wood, we haven't had a new invasive species in many, many years.
12 years.
12 years.
The last discovered was the spiny water flea back in 2012. But I think the vast majority of people at least have some type of educational knowledge. They know what they have to do when they get here, either by clean draining, drying their boat, or they know they have to go to one of the inspection stations, and it's going to be done for them. So we're very fortunate. We also talk about how some of the connecting water bodies like Lake Champlain, they have a lot more invasive species than we do. We're very, very grateful here on Lake George, and in large part to the community for their willingness to, really jump into the program. And
Yeah,
help prevent any invasives.
right, when you've passed a sort of a tipping point when people go from, well, I have to do it to I want to do it. And
Yeah,
that's really happened with the
exactly.
boat inspections, and I'm seeing it now with our septic
Yeah,
replacement and
absolutely.
inspection. Now it's going from, oh, I have to do that to, okay, I want to get this done.
Yeah,
I have to fix it.
check it off the list.
Check it off the list, and it's important because that water is important. So, yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to have an episode coming up soon about the septic
great,
inspection program so that people
super,
are well versed in that
super,
as well.
super. And just on another point, I said it's important what to do, but it's also important what not to do. So, and a great example was when we identified the salt problem,
Yeah.
and it was road salt. A number of people and agencies, I'll just say agencies, said, well, okay, let's use salt substitutes.
Yeah.
And and there's lots of salt substitutes.
Yeah.
And so, again, the Jefferson Project, our science program, looked into the salt substitutes. And guess what? They're basically beet juice, which is it's like sugar candy for
Oh,
algae. And
okay.
so, and we published the results
Yeah.
and said, thank God we didn't do that
Yeah.
because we would have just had, horrendous algae blooms
Yeah.
in the lake. So sometimes not doing something is really important. And just
Absolutely.
do like no regrets things, reduce, inspect, this and that, but don't
Mhm.
intentionally put things in the lake
Right.
because you can cause collateral damage when you do that.
Right. I know brining certainly has helped with the
That's
salt
right.
factor and the identification of, the application of that on roads prior to a
That's
storm.
right.
Our water keeper, Chris Nowitzki, who's in
That's
house,
right.
he's always looking out on
I
9
know he
when the
is. That's
terrible weather, when we have terrible weather coming
right.
and to track it, but it certainly has helped and it's something that's
Yeah.
been identified. So you mentioned the Jefferson Project. Let's
Yes.
jump into that a little bit because it
Sure.
is
Fun topic.
yeah, it's a hot topic.
Yeah.
It's a amazing research
Hmm.
entity, and it's a collaboration between IBM, RPI, Darren Freshwater Institute, and of course the Lake George
Right.
Association
Hmm.
since the merger happened. So,
Right.
why don't you tell us a little bit about the Jefferson Project?
Yeah. So the idea for it, the aha moment,
Yeah.
was when actually just before I joined the board of the Fund for Lake George.
Yeah.
Jeff Colleen and the ED at the time came to see me down at IBM to show me the preliminary results of this 30-year study
Yeah.
that the Darren Institute, funded by the LGA, had done. And I looked at the data, and my first reaction was, oh my God. I mean,
Right.
when salt levels are tripling, algae had
Yeah.
doubled. I mean, and there was concern over large oxygen depleted areas of the
Mhm.
lake, which means nothing can live in it.
Right.
And so I said, oh my God, we have to do something about this. And, I looked at, so it was a 30-year study. It was using, very good scientific techniques,
Hmm.
but it was still fundamentally going out and collecting water sample with test tubes and
Right.
jars and things.
Labor intensive.
Labor intensive. And it was, sampling 2 or 3 times a year in just a few spots.
Right.
And I said, boy, I remember saying to Jeff, Jeff, science and technology have advanced a lot. So I said, how about we do something like really big? And we really pulled together the resources of our 3 great organizations. And he was like, how soon can we do it?
Right.
So I spoke to the then president of RPI, Shirley Jackson. I spoke to myself for IBM. And of course, Jeff was on board. And so that summer, we formed the Jefferson Project. And of course, going back to Thomas Jefferson, who saw
Right.
waters and, made it the famous statement.
That
He'd
well-known
never,
quote.
he'd never
Yeah.
seen water this clean, this clear. So we formed it, and we started with a big idea, which was, let's do science on this lake like it's not been done any place in the world.
Yeah.
We coined the term, let's make it the smartest lake in the world.
Yeah.
And we started with the bathymetry of the lake. I mean, we know every single square meter, cubic meter of this lake. We deployed hundreds and hundreds of sensors around the lake,
Mhm.
and have collected so much data, developed very sophisticated computer models. I mean, we know where every cubic meter of this water is and where it's moving.
Right.
It's just incredible, coupled with the weather and the bathymetry.
And the
And-
tributaries.
And the tributaries,
Yeah.
we have upstream monitors
Yep.
because, in the end, it's been we should have known this, and we sort of knew it, but the lake is like a storage battery.
Yeah.
It's just storing whatever runs into it, and then whatever happens in it. And so really the watershed is where it all begins.
Yeah.
And protecting the watershed is a big deal.
Yeah.
And so, one of our findings, for instance, these harmful algal blooms, which started here just a few years ago.
2020 was
2020,
the first.
that's right. And fortunately, again, knock on wood, none of them have been toxic.
Right.
Which, and by the way, we understand why. But on other lakes, they almost always turn toxic, and then you can't go in the water. You have to get away from the water, which is obviously a serious deal.
Yeah. Especially with drinking water.
Yeah. So
now, why? I don't know why. Why are they not toxic in Lake George, or have they not been?
Yeah. So again, this is where heavy duty science pays off, right? So we were the first to using high powered genome systems at RPI and sampling not only our lake at Lake George, but other lakes in New York State. It turns out that there's one species, and we call them algal blooms. They're not really algae, but they're cyanobacteria. And the particular cyanobacteria that blooms in this lake does exist in other lakes. For whatever reason, the one in our lake does not have the gene that expresses toxins.
Wow.
So this gets back to, the invasive species thing.
Yeah.
The last thing we want is cyanobacteria from another lake that are ones that express toxins.
Yeah.
So, washing boats and things is important.
Yeah.
And then
that could completely change.
That could change the game. Because right now it's like it's a little bit unsightly green scum or something. Yeah. But if they go toxic, it's a different deal. Then I can't drink the water.
Right. People can't swim in it,
boat in it,
recreate, have their dogs anywhere near it.
So now what we're trying to do, and again, this is science to solutions, is we're trying to figure out what could possibly cause either that cyanobacteria to develop that gene, or other genes it has turn on toxins.
Right.
And we're trying to figure out, God forbid, any of these other cyanobacteria get in the lake, how can we turn off that gene?
Right.
So it can't go toxic on us. And we're working on that problem with some other lakes, like Chautauqua Lake.
Chautauqua, yeah. And they have they had toxic?
Oh, almost everyone is toxic.
Yeah, I've seen photos from Chautauqua, and you see, obviously we do not want any harmful algal blooms in Lake George, but you see the photos in Lake George, and then you see the photos in Chautauqua, and they stretch on for miles.
Miles and miles. It's a whole different deal. Yeah, I was out there a few weeks ago. Chautauqua Institute and the community out there are great partners of the Jefferson Project, and we have sensors out there. They've paid to bring us out there. And but the problem's orders of magnitude worse than here. Yeah. And people often ask me, Lindsay, well, why did you guys go to Chautauqua Lake? Why didn't you just stay here? And the answer was and is that if you really want to understand a problem, go where the problem is severe. Yeah. Because we have a bloom or two partially, now about every year, but small, and it's hard to study it when there's sort of almost random events. Right. So we just go where the problem is the worst, and we're
figure out how to prevent
because we don't want that to be our future.
Right. That's a science to solutions model of saying this is what it could be. That how do we make it so it's not? That's right. We're very fortunate with the Jefferson Project that we do know pretty much every facet of the lake to be able to identify and then engage whoever the power may be to figure out what the solution is. So that's a really powerful.
It is, and the biggest challenge actually is not the science. We're doing breathtaking science, world-class publications, solutions. The biggest problem is engaging the rest of the stakeholders, the businesses, the people around the lake, the state agencies, the towns, to explain to them, what do we do, what are we doing, what do we know, and again, what to do and what not to do. Right. Because, everyone has the best intentions, but as I said before, sometimes no action is better than the wrong action. Right.
Right. I think it is also sometimes a hard grasp for people because it is such a beautiful lake
Yes,
and you can see it. So then when you're talking about these threats and climate change and what the potential could be, it's like, well, but it's not now, but we don't want it to ever even get to that level.
that's
And
right.
because we're seeing it from a scientific approach, you might see red flag things before the general public would. So it is all about educating as well
It is.
of what this could be and what we don't want it to even get remotely close to that.
That's right. That's right. You know, if it's an imminent threat, you know, like one of these mega blooms at
Yeah,
Chautauqua, everybody just, you know, knows exactly
right.
to pull back. But, you know, you mentioned climate change. So we all know the lake isn't freezing as much as it used to.
No, and it's warmer. I mean, the temperature
Mm.
of the lake right now and what it has been since mid-July is
That's right.
warmer than I've really
Right.
known it to be.
Yeah.
And we've seen the spiny water flea a little
Yeah.
earlier than
Yeah. Well,
what is typical.
the water temperatures this year, according to all our measurements, were about 2.5 to 3 weeks ahead
Yeah,
of traditional timing.
yeah,
You know, July was like August normally feels,
yeah,
and it's higher now than we've seen. But you know, the icing, you know, I remember as a kid when I was up here, it froze 3 feet thick
yeah.
every winter,
Solid.
solid every single winter. And I remember I think it was late 70s, there was a year or two, and maybe one in the 80s when it didn't completely freeze.
Hmm.
So, and now, as you know, it's sort of a coin flip.
Yeah,
But we did another science to solutions. Very sophisticated computer models on icing on the lake, taking previous data, all sorts of data around snow cover,
yeah,
not just temperatures, et cetera, and developed some computer models. And the gist of it, and this is published work, but the gist of it is it's almost to the point where it's about 50-50.
hmm,
And we projected out 20, 50, 100 years. And the bottom line is my 3-year-old granddaughter, when she grows up, it's going to be rare that the lake ever freezes over.
right.
Her kids will never see the lake freeze over. And now you start to ask the question, well, what does that mean to the ecosystem of the
Yeah,
lake? And I was talking to someone last night, a fisherman, and he says, boy, I've never seen perch like I'm seeing them now, this late in the season. Um, and again, we don't know what's happening to the ecosystem, the biology
right.
of the lake. People think, well, no ice, can't drive on it, no winter festival, but it's much more sophisticated. What could happen?
Yeah, it's so far beyond the economic,
It's
you know,
yeah,
wintertime draw of it all. The ecosystem
yeah,
is at risk, I would
it
say,
is.
just in regards to what it's used to. It's really the rapid level that things are changing, a
That's right.
gradual change while still somewhat stark to some of the species is, I think, manageable. Some will adapt, but then the most adaptable tend to be invasive
They tend to
species
be the ones that we don't
that we
necessarily
don't want here.
That's right.
So, is it opening a door for
For other
more
things.
species too? Yeah.
That's right.
We have our AIS monitoring weekend each year,
Uh-huh.
and that'll be coming up. So that's where folks in the community are on the ground in the lake looking for invasive species. Certainly, like I said, we haven't had any new in 12 years. They have not found any new.
Right.
But I know the spiny water flea, our educators out on the boat are sending me pictures like,
Seeing more.
why are we not seeing plankton? We're seeing this. I think the water's so warm that the plankton are a little deeper, but
Mhm.
those spiny water flea are like,
Yeah.
here I am.
This is beautiful. This is beautiful.
Here I am,
Yeah.
but we don't want to find them, but at the same time, it's like we know they're here. At least we are identifying it.
Yeah.
We're doing it this early and boots on the
Yeah.
ground jumping. And I immediately texted someone up at the Jefferson Project,
Yeah.
like, hey, is this what I think it is?
Something's going on.
Yeah.
Something,
So
yeah.
that
Yeah.
collaboration is huge.
Yeah.
And
By the way, that's
very
a
grateful.
huge part. I mean, we have all these sensors and collect all this data, gazillions of bits of
Yeah.
data. But still, it's very important to have people observing what's going on,
Oh, yeah.
giving us input.
Yeah.
What's happening at your dock? What are you
Yeah.
seeing from your boat? And we collect all this information, and it may tip us off to say, hey, go look at
Yeah.
that spiny flea
Yeah.
in more detail, because that might be an early sign of something changing.
Yeah. We do it with harmful algal blooms too. We have Algae
We
Watch
do.
program where you're right in and around early to mid August
Yeah.
through fall. We say to people, anybody who signed up as a volunteer,
Mhm.
conditions are just right this weekend. make sure you're observing the lake a little harder than
that's
you
right.
did, in the
Yep.
previous
Yep.
days. And we certainly get people who write in whether it's a harmful algal
Yep.
bloom or not. It's better to have someone submit and someone checks it and it's not, we're grateful when it's
That's
not,
right.
but it's nice to have eyes out. And I think a lot of the community members want to. They care about the lake.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really do. They really do. Yeah, these harmful algal blooms, we now know enough about them and what the precursors are that set it up for a bloom. And then
Yes.
we know the certain weather conditions that will make it likely that we'll see it.
Right.
By the way, there are many algal blooms, bacteria blooms in the lake that we don't see on the surface.
Right.
The whole water column is already engaged, and whether we see it or not is really just a function of what's the weather
Right.
a week or two after a certain weather event.
Yep.
So,
And because of the Jefferson Project, we're able to identify.
we're able to see it. We can see the algae through the whole column in the water. It's a beautiful thing scientifically.
Yeah.
It's not so nice
No.
for a resident of the lake.
Right. But at least there is an awareness. So that's a powerful tool.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, science to solutions,
Yes.
building and just keeping this community together, all together, protecting it, and then building the resources so that we can increase our impact is that's my goal for the next couple of years.
That's everything. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And we'll certainly be seeing you around these parts.
You definitely
more frequently. So thank you so much, Dr. Kelly.
You're welcome. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you. The Lake Protectors Podcast is a production of the Lake George Association. To check out the work that the LGA is doing, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Lake George Association. You can also visit our website at lakegeorgeassociation.org. This episode was produced by Jacqueline Mignot. If you'd like to hear more, follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.